go ahead and get started here. My name is Sam Miller, local here in Jackson. Today we're going to be talking with some of the greatest founders in Mississippi, and the panel officially is the wisdom of our journey, learning some of the lessons that they've went through, the pitfalls to avoid, and learning how to raise money, prove concepts, and then connect with customers. So I'll let everyone kind of give a just brief intro to themselves, a little background.
Yeah, hey everybody, I'm Ben Hubbard. I'm from Mississippi originally. My first company I started back in 2009. I started with a friend of mine here in Jackson. It was called Navigus. We grew it to 60, 70 something employees over 9 years, and staffed in 4 countries. We were Google channel partners, so I worked with Google and I traveled all over the world and lived in Silicon Valley for a bit. I exited that in 2018, not the exit I wanted, but it was an exit, so I'm appreciative for that. I did a couple years with the Mississippi Coding Academies, if anybody's familiar with that. And then over the past 2 years, I've helped 3 different software-based companies get launched to market. I've already shut 2 down, so I've got some nice insights into that and to failure now, in addition to the success I had in my first one. And then I've got another one in the market now called Pocket Pay, which is a medical lending firm, kind of a buy now, pay later model. And then me and the guys who are doing that are about to launch another software app in the healthcare space where we've got the funding, the clients, all that kind of lined up. So I feel pretty good about that one, but we'll see.
Hello everyone, I'm Anna Barker. I'm a 2017 graduate of Mississippi State University, and I studied international business and Spanish. And while I was there, my business partner and I started our company Glow. So the whole company pretty much revolves around one product line, which is Glow Pals. And so my business partner Hagen, he is an electrical engineer by trade, had a job lined up after school working with Tesla in Silicon Valley. I had a job as a technology analyst, and we had it pretty much lined up with what we do after school. And we got involved in the Entrepreneurship Center right as we were about to graduate, and had a technology from a classroom project that led us into the children's market, which is something neither of us had any familiarity with. Neither of us had children. We still don't have children, and we now spend every day in it because the technology that we had created for this classroom project, which was essentially a liquid activated light technology that we were able to patent, but pretty simple. We actually ended up finding an application for it in the children's market after getting feedback from a mom who had no affiliation to Mississippi or to MSU, but had seen our product, taken it back for her son Bishop, who was 4 years old and autistic and terrified of the bath. It was sort of a sensory overload for him, and she called us to let us know that, this may not seem like a big deal to you, but it's every day for him. Every day we're having to force Bishop to do something that is really terrifying for him. And so she was like, I wanted you to know that I brought this home and put it in the bath with him, and it was the first time that in a year that he has taken a bath without being forced to and without crying. And so it kind of led to a little research for us. We found out that that's a pretty common trend for children on the autism spectrum to kind of struggle with sensory processing disorder and sensory overload. And so basically just with that first bit of feedback, we started asking more questions, looking into it, and developed out the Glow Pals. From there, we've continued to develop out that product line and now have about 15 products. We released them to market in 2018, just me and my partner and one part-time employee. We were in Starkville. Released in 2018, and now we've shipped about 3 million products to 46 countries. We have retailers in all 50 states and Canada and abroad. You can find it in a few major retailers like Nordstrom, Barnes & Noble, Kaplan Early Learning, places like that. And we now have dedicated at least this season of our career to fully spending all of our time in the early childhood development space. So, and we're still based in Starkville. We have about 30 employees and are still based in downtown Starkville on Main Street.
Very good. I'm Stephen Daigle, CEO of Bidmoni. So my background, I actually graduated from Southern Miss and really started my career as a financial advisor in the state. And so, as I was growing, really I worked with small businesses and began to understand the challenges small businesses have and really accessing a 401k plan. And as that grew up, it kind of was what the idea of Bidmoni came. Right now there's really a national issue. There's 43 million Americans without access to a retirement plan. And it's because, our country is made up of 5.8 million small businesses. 4.5 million don't even offer it. And the challenge that we saw is that financial advisors who largely they lean on for advice have no idea how to set these things up. There's a lot of issues because of the Department of Labor, ERISA, IRS, and we basically have the concept it's also a pain. It's very manual, it's very clunky, a lot of things that can mess up. And from that, we had the idea to create a marketplace that allows an advisor to go through, shop, compare, identify the best retirement plan for their clients, and then get all the way through the onboarding process. We had the wherewithal to patent it, which everyone said was stupid because you can't patent technology, and it's now the greatest thing we ever did because we're leveraging billion-dollar companies over licensing deals. And so by focusing on that, we began to have tremendous success. We just signed a contract with one of the top 10 largest firms in the country. We're about to sign with the largest firm to count 20,000 advisors. And it's all about the core mission of saying, hey, how do people aren't going to retire, they're not going to have money if they don't have access to this through their jobs, and how do they get it affordable, easy, and understand the tax benefits. On top of this, a factor that's adding it, but a lot of people don't know, is that there's 14 states right now that have mandated retirement plans. So if you're a small business that has at least 5 employees or more, and right now 46 have legislation in place that basically speaks to the same thing, that they're either going to force you as a small business to do it, or they're going to create a state mandated plan in which you're going to let the state or the government come and payroll deduct out of your payroll, which not too many small businesses want. So anyways, with that being said, it's great to meet everybody.
Joe Stradinger, I'm founder and CEO of Edge Theory. I began my career, I'm a recovering CPA. So I started my career way back in 91 and lived in Dallas and lived in Europe back and forth. It was a great time, but I got to know Mark Cuban through a friend of mine. Helped him sell his business to Mark. This is before Mark became who he is. He was a jerk back then, he's a jerk today. But a very smart guy. And my friend was selling a company to him, and Mark, if you didn't know this, but he was the first to ever really invent streaming on the internet. There was no streaming back then. It was called AudioNet and Broadcast.com, and he sold that. He became a billionaire. It became Yahoo Broadcast. But anyway, fast forward 5 years later, in 1998, I left my career and went with that friend of mine. He left Mark, and we built a company in Deep Ellum in Dallas. And we were early pioneers in e-commerce, but really the most unique thing we did was we used chat rooms, which people made fun of us, like, what is the internet? And there was no social media back then. People thought the internet was simply Netscape, which my partner Barksdale was obviously doing at the time. And of course, but no one thought that chat rooms would ever be anything, the idea of having a conversation. And so, but we used those, and it was extremely successful. And I sold that company in '99 to a public company in Nashville. And then from there, did a couple things, but ended up moving back here 21 years ago to raise a family and start a family. And obviously, it's been a challenge, very much a challenge being a technology person here, but it's been a blessing raising a family. And now, in a lot of ways, it's been a great thing. But today, what I have a company I started 10 years ago. Jim and I are partners. It's called Edge Theory. Edge Theory is an AI-powered narrative intelligence company, and we help organizations from the government to Mayo Clinic to local businesses understand online narratives, number one, and how they impact their world, and two, if they can, go participate and counter those narratives. And so we all know what narratives are. We were early 10 years ago, but pretty much you know what narratives are today. They drive politics, they drive yesterday's election, they drive wars, and they drive business. A bad narrative about Tesla can take a stock, and then Grandma Betty on Facebook then amplifies it, even though it's not true, and you have a problem. And so today, narratives are extremely valuable, and they've always been around since the beginning of man, but today they're just going crazy with AI and the amplification of content. And so true or false narratives impact the world, and so we study those narratives. We're deep into neural networks. Of course, they didn't really exist till 2017. Before that, we were doing a lot of ML. But we have our own neural network named ED. ED's built on BERT and BART and GPT-3, if you know much about these deep layered neural networks. It's pretty crazy. They're like minds. They don't have wisdom, but they're very smart. And so ED, we do a lot, just to put a real world example, we do a lot with the government. We're completely deal with publicly available information, but we provide lots of narrative intelligence around election security. So people get all excited about, just take yesterday, for example. People think that election security is about cybersecurity and the interference of machines and voting machines, but the reality is, and that's important, the reality is most of the hacking that occurs around election security is the hacking of our minds. It's our adversaries that every day, on social media and online media, put out narratives. I give you an example, the Mississippi water crisis. You think that's, we've all been, probably every one of our friends from around the world have called us saying, are y'all okay down there? Do you have water, right? I mean, I've gotten plenty of those calls. And it's been a real problem, right? And there's two sides of the issue. But the reality is we track, within election security, we track lots of Russians and Iranians and Chinese and all the publicly available sites out there, their state-owned media. And it is amazing to see, just take that narrative, the Mississippi water crisis. Our adversaries take issues like that and go pump the right, the left, both sides of the narrative, just to divide America. That's election security. So don't think it's always about machines and Dominion voting machines or whatever the narrative is. Every day, narratives are impacting and influencing our minds, and that's how our adversaries like to impact us. From a real-world business example, of course, we work with real companies that are not the government, and how to use narrative intelligence to go study your competitors, right? Study what they're talking about. And a lot of people get caught up in social media monitoring. Y'all have heard of that. It's sentiment tracking. That's very, very old school. That's been around 15 years. The idea of what are people talking about, right, on Twitter. That's just the pulse. But when you begin to study the narratives, which are actually blogs, videos, those kinds of things that are formulated from chatter, that's what we study. And that's what impacts wars, business, elections. So it's pretty interesting stuff, to say the least.
Thank you, everybody, for the introductions. I've got a few questions here. I think this one would be good for you, Ben. When do you know in a market that the idea that you're pursuing is something to really take to the next level, go find funding? Sounds like you have a few of those startups. Like, what do you look at when it comes to that initial push?
You mean like to jump, get in, or
To go find funding, to take it as a serious business idea and take it to the next level?
I'd say the first one I did, we pivoted a lot several times. I know we'll talk about that later, but we had gotten enough traction with some initial customers. So we had actually signed, a couple multi-million-dollar deals with some enterprise firms out in Asia. And then we were like, all right, we were like, we want to take this contract we're doing where we're still maintaining some IP and then adapt that to a new product to take to market. And the only way we're going to do that transition is because we were a services company, was to get some capital. So that was the first time I raised money, and we did a round in 2012 around that. And then here more recently, honestly, one of them I did that didn't go through is we thought we had enough of an idea with enough traction base that people will use this because people were using it. And we needed some funding so that the other founders could jump in full time.
Right.
And that was actually a fight I had with them is when did we get funding, because they didn't want to let go of the equity. And I was like, let's just let it go. Like, I don't need to control the company. I'm not worried about my investors messing me over or whatever. At the end of the day, I want to own a piece of a successful company and whatever that takes. So that was the decision there to go try it out of it. It's just, we need, this, people will use our product, people have used our product, and we need to get y'all full-time into this to actually grow this. That was another time I went out to fund.
Yeah, thank you. Anna, when you guys, were developing your business, how did you find your first customers and really, get your product out there in the market? Do you have like a unique story around getting those initial customers?
Yeah, so obviously it wasn't the first customer, but the first real mom in our space that we had the contact with was the mom who called us about her son Bishop.
Yeah.
But as far as first customers, that was probably summer of 2017. And so we started, if the Glow Pals, if you look at the original line of them, they actually kind of look like, they're very hand-drawn, and they are not perfect. There's a lot of asymmetry and stuff to them, and that's because before we could hire designers and things, when we first decided to go to the kids market, Hagen was saying, we can just take these cubes and put Glow Kids on them. And I was like, what if we just really went all in on this and turn these into characters that a kid could relate with, that they could grow with, that they could have something in common with. And so we had no designers. And so I started drawing them, and it's the reason why they still have that hand-drawn look. They have been cleaned up since, but I draw them, and if you know anything about design, I then design the packaging in Photoshop, which is not where you design packaging. But we developed them out, and we signed up to go to Atlanta market, which isn't anymore, but it historically was the largest retail market in the world. I mean, it's 3 big sky rises of retailers in them. So we got the call in 2017 after we just graduated, spent that fall and as close as we could get to product development design, launched it at the start of 2018 at Atlanta Market. And we showed up with a booth with our entire team. It looked like it was just our market team, but it was me, my co-founder, and a part-time sales employee. The whole office shut down because it was just us. And we went to market and we were showing prototypes. And so if you actually picked up the packaging off of the display we had, all of the boxes behind it were empty. And the boxes weren't actually packaging from our manufacturers. We had printed them in an office, and I had used an X-Acto. We had cut them out and folded them and taped them up and put them in there. And even the product itself were prototypes. We hadn't had pad printed samples yet, so we were using stickered labels we had made on a Mississippi State computer, and we're putting them on there. And we go, and we had a really adorable booth, thank goodness. But I mean, that's where we met Nordstrom for the first time. And we met all the smaller retailers that we use, but we ended up, I mean, we went from nothing to showing a conceptual product. And I think we brought in like 12,000 in sales, and we got our first like 30 to 40 small retailers at that market, which was huge for us because, again, we were still on a conceptual product. And so it all came from that market would be the simple answer as far as where we got our first customers, because we didn't actually start shipping until March. So it was opening pre-orders. We started doing direct to consumer in March. But the important part about that, and the reason why it's a little more long-winded than just saying at our first retail market, is that we didn't have to get it perfect to take it to market. It is, I was telling someone, one of the biggest lessons from this is that it is so amazing how much grace people will extend you if you are honest and open from the very get-go. And so that summer of 2018, when we had first started shipping, it's a critical moment, right? Like, we had gotten Kaplan Early Learning, they're putting it in schools. We're 6 months into this thing, we've been shipping for only 3 months. We had a major issue with a supplier. We were doing safety testing, and we realized that it didn't match our margin of error. We were gonna have way more product that had potential issues. And it was our first major order, and we pretty much put everything on this order. And we started testing it out, and when we realized that margin of error was gonna be big, I made the call and told Hagen, I was like, we can't send out anything from this order. The whole order has to go, and we're gonna have to redo it. And that could have felt detrimental, but we called all those customers, those first customers. They're so critical, and our part-time salesperson, we had a few other part-time people, we were trying to figure out how to approach it, and I was like, nobody gets an email. Everybody we call, and we're gonna tell them what happened. We're not gonna give them any excuse on it. We're gonna say we're a small business. We're just getting started with this. Hey, look, like, this isn't up to par. Your order's gonna be late. You ordered this in January. We're not shipping out till the summer. It's gonna be a little bit later. We're sorry. We're gonna keep you as informed as possible. We didn't have a single person kick back. We didn't have a single person cancel their order. In the end, we had people actually thanking us for calling and for having an honest conversation. And that was so contrary to everything I had like, especially when you're watching TV or, you know, the Shark Tank idea. It's like everybody is out to get each other, and that just isn't what we've experienced. Like, at the end of the day, whoever's on the other line, whether it's a buyer from a Nordstrom or if it's for like the local toy store down the road, it's a person on the other end of the phone. And like, the more humanity you can bring into business, the more open people are to wanting to do business with you. And so those first customers were from that market, and we could have really messed that up, but we were very open from the get-go that we were getting started, that we didn't have all the answers, but that we would be as open as we could moving forward, and it really paid off for us. And so I think that was a really important thing to learn early on in my career as well, is that a little humanity and grace and transparency goes a much longer way than just always hitting the mark.
Thank you. Stephen, same question to you. Like, how did you get those first customers? And then kind of part two to it, was there any kind of referral process, or can you just speak on how that process of referrals and working with people's network really works?
Yeah, and I think it's awesome to hear her story. I think you have very different business models: consumer goods, technology, different space. I love to hear you got grace. I deal with financial institutions out of New York. They don't have any grace in there. My M-Trade guys will probably understand that. But I think early on, I think what we neglect is I was an advisor, but I wasn't a back office person. I don't have connections. We don't have any financial hubs in Mississippi, and so you start thinking, if that's how I'm going to sell, how do I get out to these people? And it's a very old relationship business at that level. These are not tech companies. And so, there are conferences, but we're in a world that conferences cost a lot of money, like $50,000 to get a booth in the back corner, and no one's going to talk to you. And so what was interesting, we believed in it, we believed in the concept, but we really had no marketing budget to go out there and go to these. And so interestingly, the way we did it is LinkedIn. I said, hey, I can go find these CEOs of these companies and I can directly target them. And the deal we just signed with Cambridge, a 4,000 person group out of Iowa, I cold messaged the CEO, and that started a 2-year conversation that signed the deal similar to another firm. And so the very first relationship that we had was through LinkedIn. I was able to sell a guy that was trying to grow his practice. He was one of the fastest growing firms in the country, on what we were doing and how we could partner. And he ended up bringing me to a guy in Scottsdale, Arizona that had tons of money because they sold insurance and annuity products and they had nothing for the 401k space. And we needed a customer, because everyone was saying, go validate this. And we were in a space that you can't necessarily just sell. There's compliance that has to go into it. So I can't go to, John at Edward Jones and say, sell this. They're going to say, well, call my home office and, figure out if it goes through. And so that ended up leading to our first customer. Someone was willing to pay us, and they had 150 advisors, and they said, oh, you're going to help us do it. Fortunately, they were also our guinea pig, because there was a lot of parts of our system that were good, but there was a lot that weren't good. Now, the difference is it didn't exist in the industry. So it wasn't, I think something important to know is, like, you're not competing against perfect. You're competing against everyone else. And so don't apologize, but know that other big companies don't innovate. So you're going to have the ability to work towards that, at least in tech. And so we basically utilized that group to build out what is today. And in essence, we built a case study that when I went back to the firm I met 2 years ago, that's 4,000 advisors, and said, look what we did for them, look at the efficiencies we created, look at the sales we drove, and that's what signed the deal to do it. So I think it's very important that, where we made the mistake when we started, we went so broad, we were going to solve, everyone's going to be the Google or the Amazon of something. But remember, Amazon was a bookstore. They were an online bookstore. So just stop trying to solve the world's problems. Go solve a very specific problem or build a very specific product. Find people that love it. I think anyone that doesn't know, read the Airbnb story. People hated that idea, but they went and found, 10 people that really bought into that whole community and built the entire program around that. And so I think that's the advice. Do that, but ultimately understand that in most things, it is relationship driven, and you need to find the right partners that believe in your product, and they're going to give you a lot of grace, even if it's not perfect, because they believe in you as a person. And it doesn't matter what you're selling to people, and people want to do business with people that they like, they trust, and that they can relate to. And the reality is you're going to find some people that want to help young companies. They want to be able to say, hey, I was the first person that bought Glow, and now I get to go watch them on the Today Show. And that gives them passion in life. And so, but you still got to, go out there until you find that one that says, hey, I believe in you enough that I'm willing to give you money, write your check, and then help you grow this thing, and I'll be your partner through it. So.
Great. Joe, how many pivots have your companies gone through, or can you just talk through the importance of knowing when something isn't working and you need to redivert efforts, or can you just speak on that a little bit?
A lot of pivots. It depends on, like, the first company in '98, we didn't really pivot. We went out there to sell music online or CDs, it was really cool. We could actually show people how to open a CD case online. That's really cool for us back then. Spent $2 million on building a website you can build for free this afternoon. But we didn't really pivot much then. It was I had no kids. I probably worked 20 years. It only lasted 9 months. It was a great return, but I worked like a lot. But we didn't really pivot then. Where I've really pivoted the last 10 years with Edge Theory, and we built our whole. One thing that's interesting about what you just said. I would say the way you find customers is you seek out conversation. We say that all the time. I mean, I'm a big proponent that conversation is our greatest asset or our greatest liability, and we can all use it, but we got to seek out conversation, whether you're at the market or whether you're online. Everything we've done is about seeking out conversation. So, but with Edge Theory, we started out, our entire stack is built on the art of conversation, which is listening, thinking, analyzing, listen, thinking, speaking, and analyzing. That's how we all have conversation, whether we go to church or a cocktail party or whatever. So our whole stack is built on that. We've pivoted a lot. Our stack hasn't changed, right? It's all built on those 4 pillars. But what we did the first probably 5 years, the last 10 years, we helped people participate in conversation, and we're really good at giving people what to say. Match.com, Mayo Clinic, some big brands. But where we really pivoted is realizing today more and more with so much content out there, people need to understand conversation before they can even go participate in conversation and understand those narratives. So we've made a massive pivot. It was always there underneath the hood, but and we're at, we've had Mayo Clinic a customer for 10 years, so we haven't really pivoted in some of our products, but where we really realize we have something special is when the government calls you, and that was, sort of spooky, but also very real. And so that's when I realized we had something special, I think. And so, one of the things I tell people all the time, and I've made so many mistakes in my life, I've learned, I have a lot more failures than successes. And in the last, 20-something years, I've always been too early to the market, which is the worst thing you can do. It doesn't matter how great your product is. If you're ahead of people around too court. And so now, finally, I think people understand the power of narratives. So that's the first time, and that's made us pivot again. So.
Thank you. So, same question for you. I know you have a lot of experience with pivots.
Yes, I do. So we started Navigus with an idea of a product add-on to Google Earth Enterprise. Does anybody here still use Google Earth? Yeah, people still use it, right? So I haven't asked this question in a while. So what was the first thing you ever did when you opened Google Earth?
Find the house.
Exactly, find your house. So I've asked this question in about 20 countries, and that's the answer I get everywhere, except once, in South Korea, I looked at my office. I was like, oh really, huh? That's your boss right there. I'm sure you did, huh? Not your house. But, back in the day, Google Earth had a product called Google Earth Enterprise, which was a behind the firewall thing that you could buy, and you could spend $200,000 on it and do it. We took the leap to start this company because we were building a product on top of that. And then we had the good idea to go show our product to the Google Earth Enterprise product manager. And he, of course, told us that, oh man, that stuff you're going to build, it's in our roadmap. And so we're like, so I still remember I'm in Houston, Texas, off a job at my friend's house because, you don't have money for hotels, so you stay with buddies. And I get the call, and both my partner were there. And he was like, dude, he said that, and I was like, all right. The nice thing about that is that led to my partner working at Google for a year while I stayed. We bootstrapped, and that's something we talk about. We were bootstrapped with this, doing services, whatever it took forward. And then we had to basically just stop building our product. My partner worked at Google, and then we just did service work for a year. That contracted ended in Mountain View. I was still in Jackson doing the stuff, running the business, get enough to grow, hire some salespeople. And it led to kind of our next pivot, which is like a year later after that, the head of Google Maps and sales in Singapore called us and said, hi, would you be interested in moving your business to Asia? And we're like, maybe. And they were like, well, we'll pay for you to come do it. And so Google actually funded us to go around and act as their sales engineer and their solution architects because no one in Asia understood the product. And no other company was going to pick up and move. we're just a little small company in Mississippi with like 6 people. We're like, sure, we'll move to Asia. That was our next pivot. It was actually the best thing we ever did. I lived over there, my partner lived over there, and that's where we got most of our staff and clients. So, that was kind of a narrative of those. I also like to tell the story because a few years later, I was in Manila talking to an ex-Googler about it, and I told the same story of how we kind of pivoted off. She's like, that product manager lied to you. There's no way that, that was in his roadmap. I was like, you know what? When we, it was like 28 or so when we told him, and the guy was a friend of ours, right? So we trust him. And Google's our whole thing to go. And then I still remember him sitting there in this little coffee shop in Manila going, shit, you're right. There's no way that was in his roadmap because like the stuff my partner's working on was not really related to what we were doing. So don't believe everything a product manager tells you either. So they will steal your ideas. So.
That's great. Anna, can you talk about, I guess, the culture and hiring process and finding good people to work with you? I mean, it sounds like you've kind of grown the company. What do you guys look for when it comes to hiring employees and partners and everything?
Yeah, that was really surprising to me, is how hard it is to hire good talent, but also managing people in general. When people ask, like, what was the biggest challenge?
Hiring
to
people?
you? Yeah, I
Yes.
think hiring people for sure, but then
Yes.
I think managing people was just exponentially harder than I thought it was going to be. I was just about to say too, I can't believe that Innovate lets me come to these anymore because I know that they always think that I'm an MSU plant because I go on a big tangent about MSU in the East Center as Eric's sitting there in the back. But like one thing was like we went straight from the Eastern University into hiring people and we're supposed to be their manager, and it's not like we had any of our previous management that was an advisor to us that we could kind of look back on. So we relied pretty heavily on Eric and Jeffrey to lean into it. I remember Jeffrey telling me the most important thing that you can learn is that there is you will never find a way to manage people and then just roll it out for everybody. And he was like, you got to figure out how does it work for each person? How are people motivated? How do they take constructive feedback? How do they take news they might not want to hear? And he was like, it's different for everybody. You got to figure it out for all of them. I wish there was a shortcut. There's not. Sorry, you have to do that to be a good manager, and I was just surprised at how challenging that was. And so we very, very early on, we kind of laid out some cultural stuff that was important to us. And so one thing is we have a children's brand. It was very important to me that we were accommodating and flexible to working parents. So we made sure to have we have a really robust paternity leave for moms and dads, making sure that we had robust, good quality health care and vision and dental, and that we were paying on those premiums as an investment to an employee because they should be able to go to the doctor if they need to, if they're sitting there spending 8 hours a day with us. Making sure that we had, flexibility for parents if they were taking their kids to school or if their kid was sick or with time off, just with all of that. The really interesting thing about doing this right out of school is that you kind of get to take all of these lofty ideas of what you think would be so awesome in a workplace, and in a way you kind of get to put your money where your mouth is, and you get to decide how many of those are important to you. Are you willing to actually, you can say it all day long that you think there should be paternity leave and that corporations should provide that, but then are you going to foot the bill for it? And so we had to figure out which of those were the most important to us and what we were going to invest in, and those that I just think were really important. The other thing is that we obviously, with the hiring aspect, we wanted to keep as many jobs in the state as possible. We, especially right after graduating, we were had all our energy behind this idea of combating the brain drain in the state, and still do, and still think that that's a noble effort. And we have a lot of our employees in Starkville, but we realized to get to access the talent pool that we needed, that we were going to have to start hiring remote employees. And so building up the infrastructure for that, making sure that they would be able to have all of the same benefits and access and resources as in-house employees, and then how do you manage those people? But generally, a lot of our employees are pretty young. Being in Starkville is probably the only place in the state, I think, and Hagen does too, that it could have worked, because one, we have this amazing, encouraging community where, again, you think of that kind of cutthroat Shark Tank environment. we literally got to build a startup in a community where everybody wanted us to win. Like literally everybody was cheering us on. It's the exact opposite of the kind of culture you think of in startup. It was, we had people at our first Christmas when we were overwhelmed. Like, I think Eric, like the dean shut down the East Center. Eric and Jeffrey came and they sat on the floor of our office to package product. Our landlord sent his daughter and his wife for free to come. Like our landlord is sending his family to come package product on our floor. That doesn't happen if you go to a place like Silicon Valley. And so we have this culture of community really that I thought was really important. We're a really close-knit team. And all the employees that we have that are remote, they come in at least once a month and we get them there. But hiring that really good talent is still something that we're learning how to do and how to do it right. But I think that the emphasis on caring for your people and investing in them, especially, so when I was growing up, my stepdad, his generation, most people stayed at their job for their entire career. And I remember thinking as a kid, again, not realizing the responsibility that came with it, that I couldn't believe that, he didn't have better health care that was provided by his employer. And the things you would hear them complain about growing up, you were thinking, how can it be that way? And getting to kind of right out of college say, that's not how it's going to be for us. We're going to take care of our people and make sure that they are not living just to work. And I think it's really paid off. And so we have a really, really close-knit team, and we're still figuring out how do you hire the best people. But as far as retaining talent, we've done a really good job at retaining that talent once we are able to find it.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
I think one thing that I've gotten really excited about is internships. And we've always, I've used them since 1998, but I think interns is the future of how you hire people. We have interns from Clemson, Furman, Liberty, Georgia Tech, and Ole Miss. And so as just yesterday, we made a big announcement with Dr. Boyce at Ole Miss. We have 50 kids at Ole Miss that work for us right now. And we're probably gonna have 200 by the end of this year. And I think getting interns, it's about managing them because it's a different animal, but that is the future of how you hire people. Because not that we're gonna hire all these students, but they're gonna go out there and use our product, right? Whether they work in the government, whether they're analysts, whether they're journalists, and we hire, our interns range from every discipline on the liberal arts campus, not just computer science. That's probably the smallest. So I think interns and how you grow them, they're so smart, they're young. It's again how you manage them, but that's to me the future, because it is hard as heck, especially in Mississippi, to hire people. It just is, let's just be honest. And so we've had luck where we got a young guy from math and science school who went to Stanford and came back, but that's very odd, right? In AI to get a person. So I think internships, whether it's one or two, or like we're trying to do it on a massive scale where we want to have, literally our goal is to have 1,000 interns in the next 5 years. And it's amazing how to use these. They're smart, they're smarter than us. They're doing stuff in AI that didn't exist until 2018. I'm 53, so they know a lot more than I know. They need structure, but I think internships are highly underrated. Most people should go after them big time.
Can I add something to that? It's just a neat story. Is we had 5 interns one summer, computer science guys from some state, and I left at like 8 o'clock, the office we had, and 2 of my interns were there working on the project we had for them. I came back the next morning at 9 a.m. and I'm like, why are y'all wearing the same clothes? We didn't go home last night. My interns, who I was paying peanuts, had stayed at my office all night working on the project I was doing for them. So they were just that excited, that motivated for it. So
energy too.
Yeah, the energy is amazing. Yeah. So if you can get good interns, that's a good way for your early level talent. And 2 of those we ended up hiring full time.
And what about like the managing? You mentioned that it's kind of hard to motivate and manage and everything. Do you have any advice?
Well, so we're not in those places like Georgia Tech and stuff, but with Ole Miss, we actually now have a big space on campus. So it's called Insight Park Innovation Hub. And I'm totally new to Ole Miss 2 years ago when my son went there, but it's been a great partnership with Dr. Boyce and the provost. But we have a space, and so we have actually hired a faculty person from Ole Miss to manage the students. And then I have team, I go up there every week for a night because I just love to get energy. So you're gonna have to have that. I think I'm all about remote work, but I think it's overrated. You gotta come together and have a conversation. I think I'm all about flexibility and letting people do things, but if you don't get together and come together, nothing will work, even an intern program. So we've had a virtual lab, Edge Theory Lab, for a long time, but now we have a physical lab at Ole Miss.
Gotcha. Great. I think we have time for maybe one more question here. Stephen, we talked about this on our call beforehand. Talk about when you're starting a company, setting up ground rules, all the red tape that comes with a business.
I think anyone in here, when you start a company, you're just excited. You have an idea. Anybody that'll listen to you, you're excited. You don't think, what if things don't go right a year from now? And when you never think it with your founders that you're going to turn. They're a lot of times your best friends. You have strong relationships, and so you're not thinking, how do I incorporate? How do we get through this? And we, fortunately or unfortunately, had an issue with that where we had 3 founders. My best friend, I thought, was one of them. One of my advices in hiring is, only hire who you need, and I would strongly stay away from corporate people, because corporate people are the bane of a startup's existence, because they work slow if they work, and they want a lot of money for it, and they're probably, we just came to a point where you understand as a founder that your value is in the equity, not in you're going to get $200,000 a year to sit around and just play CEO. And we went back and said, God, we went online and drafted C corporation documents in Delaware, and now we're sitting in a space that we're trying to figure out how we're going to make it as a company. And how does this work? How do we vote a CEO? How do we kick someone out? And you never think it's going to happen until it happens. And I think that's the step that most people don't go through to say, what was my process? How did we document? What is our rules about who stays, who goes? Because there's this assumption that if you have a co-founder, everything's equal always. We're going to get equal salaries. We're going to get equal equity, and you need a governance that says, well, if you stop, it's kind of like we all remember group projects when we had, physics class, and, you always have one person that does 90% of the work and the 3 people that sit and just ride, and it happens in business, and so I think really understanding that, the only time that's going to matter is if you're successful, and that's when it matters a lot. And that's all of a sudden when you see stories that people turn on you, people sue you, people want money from you. I mean, we got a call from Blue Cross Blue Shield that we were infringing on their trademark because we had a blue shield, and we're like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Like, we went to them and they gave us a negotiation, which was, drop it, get rid of it, and then we're like, for how much money? And they're like, oh no, that's the negotiation. Like, and so, we had other trademark disputes, we have a patent, and so I would just say very focused, and obviously you have access to Innovative, saying, hey, before we even get to this place, like, we need to structure this. And unfortunately, in a case that it's not going to work and we need to be protected, because I think there's other factors, if you study and you raise capital, that if you raise too aggressively and you don't hit benchmarks and you have to raise a down round, that you can lose your company. You can lose all your equity. I mean, fortunately, my wife works for a startup out of Santa Monica. They're in the outdoor furniture space, and they've raised a $500 million valuation last year. The world has come to an end, and I think they just raised $60 million to save the company. Basically, the owners lost everything. They own almost nothing, and so you really have to understand, I think, and maybe the caveat, not just setting it up, but on the very front end, what is your exit? You've got 3 ways. You're either going to make this a career business, something you're passionate about. You're probably not going to get investment because that's not what people want. You've got to think that you're going to be the next Google, and you're going to go raise just hundreds of millions of dollars. But once you start down that path, if you can get there, there is no turning back without losing everything. So you may have a very stressful 10 years to walk away with nothing. Or there's the, hey, I'm going to raise, and we know Nordstrom's going to buy us. Or for us, we're like, hey, and our goal is in 4 years, if we can sell and walk away, like, everyone's happy. But you kind of have to know that on the front end, because once you start down a certain path, you're not really, if you go for the, hey, we're going to go be the next $1 billion company, and all of a sudden you say, oh, we're going to sell it for $100 million, you're kind of you're too late. You raised too much money. There's not enough in it. So I think those are some of the things that I would really focus on, even though it's burdensome. And one of the other factors is that we just had the wherewithal to file a patent. I didn't know how to do it. I filed a provisional patent in 2017, ended up getting it issued, just kind of sat there. And then all of a sudden, now that we've had success, really big competitors are trying to build what we're doing. And whether it's defensible or not doesn't matter. It's the idea in their mind that if we pursue this, we're gonna have to pay you a lot of money if you prove it, and we can block you from signing contracts because we'll send something to who you want to sign with and put the thing in their mind that they may be infringing. And that's enough to deter people from saying, well, why don't we license it? Why don't we do something else? And so, all of those factors on the front end are very important before you really start actually running a company. So.
Great. I think we have about 2 or 3 more minutes. Do we have any questions in the audience for any of the panelists?
I have a question. Earlier you were mentioning your struggles with management and hiring people. And so my question is really for each one of you just to answer this. As entrepreneurs, there are things that we struggle with. Like you said, the guy was like, I don't know, you just have to figure it out. He was gonna figure out how to manage, which essentially to me kind of falls under leadership. Like how do you motivate and inspire a team to get behind you in your journey? For each one of you, was there something else outside of leadership and management that you struggled with that you didn't have a resource to? Like, your mindset with money, mental health, work-life balance. Was there something that stands out to you that you were struggling with in the building of the business that you didn't have a direct resource to help you with?
I'd say that changes as you grow the company, right? So like my company, like Navis, we started, it was a couple engineers, and then we had to go hire salespeople. We didn't even know how to hire salespeople. We had to learn. And then probably the worst hire I ever made was hiring a VP of sales, where we pissed away $200,000 like a warrant to a headhunter and all that, right? And then he didn't make a single sale, and we had to let him go after a year, right? So, this is a hard track. But I'll say in the early stages, you just got to focus on people who will fit in with you and complement a skill, whatever that may be. They've got to complement you somehow. You've got to be able to work together. And then as you grow, you start to get more disciplined in your processes and how you manage people and track them. Because at one point, I was tracking 6 employees in 4 countries and 10 different physical locations. So how do you do that? You implement like Slack and other tools like that, so you can see. And we were mostly just performance driven. So if it's a developer, they hit their tasks. If it's a project manager, the customer's happy. If they're sales, they hit their sales. Right? And then if people aren't hitting their tasks, especially with a startup, you just gotta cut them. Especially on sales, we got really ruthless. We got so ruthless that we hired a guy as a sales engineer in Austin, Texas. We thought he'd be awesome. 2 weeks later, my partner said, hey, I don't think he's gonna work out. I was like, okay, cut him. After 2 weeks. Brutal, but I'm not gonna sit here and waste the money on it. We couldn't afford to. Because that 1 or 2 people, we kept people too long. And those people you keep too long bleed resources that then threaten the whole company. And now 50 or 60 people could be at risk because if we miss payroll. So that's what I'm saying. That's the progress that I went through. So others can tackle it.
Yeah, different business models all have different outlooks. Because keeping somebody on too long that isn't the right fit does bleed resources. A conversation we just had earlier this week that was very lengthy with me and my co-founder and one of our board members was about identifying some of these people that are real rock stars that really have potential. How do we make sure they're in it for the long term? But then also, how do you spot some of those people that maybe aren't rock stars yet but that have potential? So if they aren't quite hitting the mark, is it that they're not in the right seat? How do we take that potential that you see and figure out how to leverage it more? Again, different business models. So our mentality on particularly it's why we do several rounds of interviews whenever we hire. If it's anything design or art based, we get them to do a little small project in the interview part. Because once we hire them, I was serious when I said about the investment people. I have a pretty lengthy runway before I'll let somebody go, which sounds a little unwise, because a bad apple can absolutely bleed resources. But we have historically really tried to, even if it means rearranging that person, is it that they need some professional development? We hire a lot of young people, not all young people, but could they be readjusted a tiny bit and put back on course? We typically will extend a little bit of a lengthy runway, and it's why the hiring process is a little bit longer for us, because I do think that once you've made that investment that we have an obligation to try to make that work if it's at all possible. As far as the initial question with what are some of those other challenges, I mean, we could probably give you an itemized list all day long because it's all so hard. I mean, everybody in this room could say it's all really hard. But a more overarching one is that one thing that I lacked is, and that we still are trying to find a solution to, is really good personal advisors. And so we have a board, we have investors, but on an advisory or guidance capacity, the number one resource for us has been MSU and the E-Center. Eric has received middle of the night calls. He has come to meet us for coffee at 7 a.m. on a Sunday. He's coming to meet us late at night, taking calls basically at all times. But Glow is not the only thing that the E-Center is helping. We're not the only student startup that came out. And so, we can't go to them with everything. And so one thing I've talked about a lot is on our board, we basically had like several open seats for like 2 years now because we were wanting to fill one of them with somebody in a creative space that's done some media work, and like if it was possible, trying to get a woman on that board. And we've been searching for 2 years for somebody to fill that seat because our board can work at a little more of an advisory capacity than the rest of our investors. And I will say, I know that at these events we all want to come together and talk about what we love about doing it in the state and the benefits of it, but like there is no denying it is an uphill battle to do a startup in Mississippi. Like, these events sometimes paint that a little differently. Like, you need to know going into it, there are demographic challenges that are unique to the state. It is very hard. A creative business or anything where you're wanting to do, like where you need PR, media opportunities and stuff as well, there are demographic challenges that you just wouldn't have if you were somewhere else. You just have to know that up front. There are challenges with finding advisors, with hiring talent. There are some of that stuff that we've talked about up here, like they're just a little bit worse because of where we are. There are great advantages as well, the sense of community and all the support we've received, but there are challenges, and I would say that like one of them that is kind of an umbrella because it could advise on all those other challenges is finding really good advisory capacity to help lead us for the things that we just don't know. We talk about that all the time. Like, there's stuff that we just don't know just because like we haven't had enough years in a career. So.
And I would say, just to add, it's the most valuable thing you can find is a mentor.
Yeah.
Mine was Jim Lowry. Someone that's been in the space that gets it. Because I'll be honest, when you're at the top, and then none of your employees come and pat you on the back when the world's coming to an end and you can't pay payroll. I know mental health is brought up. Unfortunately, if you're a CEO, nobody cares at all. And so you're sitting here trying not to die most of the time, and you're trying to keep. Your employees aren't going to stay with you if they think, hey, we only have a month worth of money. I got to go take care of myself. And so really the only way to navigate that, because the number one thing you have in a startup is hope. That's it. Every day you're going to get these people that want to state the obvious. They want to come sit down with you and let you know that if we don't do this, and this, we're going to go out of business in 3 months. It's like, great. Why are we talking about this? I bet, and so I think your focus is saying, find someone that's done it. Find someone that's going to be optimistic that can get you excited, because you're excited, but people will suck the life out of you. And it's usually the naysayers that have never done it. You're going to get a lot of really bad advice. And nothing to anybody in this room, in this building, but sometimes it'll come from here, and it's like they've never done it. They don't know what you're going through. And so you do have to find that one person that says they have somewhat, they've done it, and that's who I can lean on. And you almost just need someone to say, hey, it's going to be okay. Go down, do what you can do. It'll happen, how it happens. And so, I think that's the most important thing you can find. And give them equity, make them invested in it. There's so much like raising money, but have the right people that are aligned with your vision on your board, in your company, that are going to back you, because there's going to be a lot of people against you. Because people don't like success. They want to keep you down. And so you've got to step above that. And then once you're successful, then everybody wants to be your friend. That's when, because they want money from you. So that's what happens, right?
Yeah, I think that, on the hiring side, clearly I'm a huge, and my team goes against me half the time, but it's all about attitude. I mean, in the early days, I let the board, which, Jim has 2 seats, I have 3 seats. I let the board, and I fell on my own sword, push me to go hire salespeople like you. And I had an office in Santa Monica, I had an office in DC. I hired 40 people, very expensive salespeople. It was the worst thing I ever did. And they were all these great resumes. And at the end of the day, their attitude, they were elitist, half of them, and didn't really want to work hard.
They didn't wanna work.
And they had these
work.
great backgrounds, these great resumes. At the end of the day, throw that all out. If they don't have an attitude and want to work hard, I mean, my dad raised me that way. At the end of the day, it's about hard work. It's about 10,000 hours. And so I think that's what I've learned, and I've failed miserably many times, but that's what I look for is attitude. As raised to, Mississippi and stuff, I mean, I think it's a challenge. I mean, I'm an example. I've been here 21 years. I've built a bunch of different companies. But I think it's actually, today, it's a really awesome place, but it is definitely a challenge. I mean, how many times I go and, you're from Mississippi, you wear shoes, do you have an airport? And Barksdale used to always say, in Netscape days, when he was CEO of Netscape, they asked if we had an airport in Jackson. They really asked those questions. But then when people come to know us, they really love us. And I think there's so much, especially in the space that I'm in now, this cognitive space of cognitive security and narratives. Heck, this is the greatest place on the earth where we understand narratives and storytelling than any other state I've ever been to. And I've lived a lot of places. So now I'm sort of excited because I'm in this narrative space, this cognitive space, which is literally the hottest space. And this is the place to be, right? It's to be in Mississippi because we know how to tell stories. Sometimes we know too much about each other, but it's a great place to be. And so for 20 years I've tried to leave 20 times. And now I'm so happy I'm here, right? And I'm happy that, so I could love to talk about that. I mean, I've tried so many times, because I'd say the hardest thing about being a founder is it's lonely as hell. It's lonely. And how I built this, Guy Raz on NPR was my only fellowship I would have half the time. I go for a run, and now he makes you pay for the podcast, and I said, forget that. But if you ever go look at Guy Raz, how I built this, that's literally my fellowship, because no matter how much I love my people and they love me, it is lonely. You're the guy on top, and it is miserable, and you're on the kitchen floor crying, going, how am I gonna feed this beast? How am I gonna make payroll? So I think everybody thinks they can be an entrepreneur, but it's just, I think that finding someone to mentor. I mean, I'm blessed to have Jim Barksdale and things like that, but I think finding people that are in your exact space is so critical, because I've been very lonely professionally. I've loved being here from a lot of other ways of fellowship, but it is extremely lonely. No one tells you you're doing a good job. It's very, but it's very, very lonely. So
I think that's all the time we have for today. I think they'll all be around. Feel free to come and say hey to everybody, but thank you all for coming. And,